Right. Did you recognise that song? Did you choose that theme tune?
No, I didn't.
No.
I'd love to have my own walkout music, but...
If you had to choose a theme tune, Lachlan, for doing stuff like this, what would it be?
Oh, mate. I don't know. I'd have to dig into the playlist. I put together a playlist for Oz that was about 35 hours long. Sure there's something in there.
How long does it take you to curate a 35-hour-long playlist?
It was rushed as usual. In the week before, I was just kind of like every spare minute, just add a few songs in there. But yeah, a little while.
Big question is, you do look remarkably fresh, but how are you after that amazing adventure? I mean, I hope you don't get sick of being asked about it, because it was a real feat. I mean, you knocked a week off the record, but it still took you 30-odd days, 14,210 miles. Extraordinary, but how are you now?
I'm all right now. The 2 weeks afterwards are pretty rough. And I know it sounds dumb, but like, I just had such sore legs. Yeah.
So that's a revelation.
Yeah. I mean, everything beyond that was fine, but yeah, I just woke up every day feeling like I'd been riding for 200k the day before, even though I hadn't been doing much at all. And then for like 2 weeks afterwards, every night when I'd like fall asleep, I'd just be dreaming. It was like 100k to go forever.
Wow.
Yeah, there's this small town near Port Macquarie, which is just near the end, Kendall, and I'd be stuck in Kendall.
So this
trying to get this ride done. Yeah.
It sounds like you've got some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder.
yeah. Well, I work through it.
Well, consider this a sort of therapy.
Yeah.
So take us back, actually, to the earlier part of the year. Of course, you've had a great season. If you want to call it a season, a great year, because is it really a season with what you do? It's kind of a year, isn't it?
Yeah, just kind of year-round.
Yeah, just
year-round bike riding.
Yeah, just riding your bike. But at what point was the idea seeded? At what point did you think, yeah, I'm going to do this?
I think it was in March. I was just sort of trying to work out what sort of long ride I wanted to do, and I really wanted to do something back in Australia. And there's a few different routes. I was looking at some off-road routes, and I was doing it with my wife, Rachel, and then she was like, I'd really love to come. And then I was like, oh, maybe we could do something with a crew, and then the obvious choice is to just do the whole lap. And we thought like, yeah, just like doing choice. That.
I mean,
yeah, but we'd never done, well, she's never been a part of like any of the ultra stuff I've done, so that was something that like really excited me. And then, yeah, we sort of planted the idea with the team, and then it wasn't really until maybe a month before that it was like, okay, we're definitely doing this. And then the reality of what it takes to put together a ride like that, it's very different than like when I do something self-supported. I just kind of show up with my things.
I guess it's simpler in many ways, isn't it? It's kind of
Yeah. Like, I mean, it's more complicated in the doing, but the process of getting our crew together, vehicles, and all that kind of thing was it was a scramble, but we got it done. And
also a commitment from your team as well to follow you for for the best part of over a month.
Yeah,
and living, almost like this symbiotic relationship with you as well. That's quite a big ask. That's not just logistics. That's trust. That's what friendship's all about, isn't it? You really need to know. You're going to find out who your mates are.
Yeah, and I kind of had like a dream list of people I wanted to come, and thinking that like, maybe I could get a couple. But everyone was really keen to come and do the whole lap, which, as you said, it's a big commitment, to take a month out of your life to come and live in a camper and, basically deal with me. But yeah, we put together an amazing crew, and I was super happy the fact that I could have all those people with me.
So just what about the days leading up to it? I mean, how do you actually, we know you're very good at riding a long way, and also very good at riding a long way quite fast. But how do you actually mentally prepare for that? Because this is the biggest thing you've ever done. I mean, you've done some extraordinary stuff in the past, of course, including being seriously competitive on the gravel scene as well, which we'll talk about in a bit, where there's a bit more of a racing edge. But this was completely different. The pace is dictated by you and you alone, isn't it? And
yeah.
Obviously beating the record and your schedule. But nobody else is dictating anything apart from yourself. So how did you mentally get into the place to say, right, I'm going to do it?
Yeah, it's kind of. I was getting ready for Leadville, which was like a big goal of mine this year, and that was kind of taking up all my mental capacity and like preparation. And then I sort of finished that, and then really only had a week at home before flying to Australia. And then during that week, it was like getting back on a road bike again for the first time, which like getting used to that kind of thing. And then I sort of realized only in that week like the enormity of it, and just like how big those days would be, and just trying to get like an understanding of how I would go about like just like the monotony of it. And yeah, I was definitely pretty anxious about it, because there's it's just such a long period of time to be pushing that there's so many things out of your control that can go wrong. Like different injuries, and for me, I know that like once I start and I'm committed to doing it, like I'm not going to stop, and it's just a matter of like what challenges are going to crop up and how difficult it's going to make it. And I don't know, through the process of like angsting about it and thinking about it, at a certain point you're like, well, I don't really have control over those things, so I just got to get on with it. And the thing I realized was that I was going to have to communicate everything with the crew, which like, and rely on other people, which is something that like I'm not very good at, and I would need to have their full support to make the whole thing work. So just kind of like easing into that idea of like, okay, I got to let other people do things. Yeah.
Yeah. And what about sort of mental support? Because there's a lot of, I don't know, cycling or sport in general, elite sport is, the mental side is equally as important as the physical side, especially something like this. Do you lean on anybody else? Is there anybody else that you talk about? Or are you very solitary? Do you prefer just to deal with the mental side of it yourself? Or is there anybody who gives you support in terms of the mental prep? Because it is quite extraordinary what you're doing. You're putting yourself in a place that only a certain amount of people will ever do that. Almost like the pioneering sort of spirit. It reminds me of the kind of the early days of sport and exploration. It is a very different kind of place to put yourself, and you do need to be a special type of person. I think your disposition, you're clearly suited to that, but do you look for elsewhere for support?
Yeah, I think, my wife Rachel, she probably, in like the lead up, any concerns I'd have, I kind of always bounce them off her.
Right.
But then, especially during this ride, normally I'm very like, you have to be quite closed, and you can't really let emotions dictate the way you're going about what you're doing, because the second you get, on that kind of roller coaster of emotion, that's when things get derailed. But having her there, she was someone I could kind of like let my guard down with and be vulnerable for like half an hour at the end of the day.
Almost like lose your rag a little bit. It's important to actually, let go of emotions like that rather than just keep them all pent up. It's quite dangerous, really, isn't it?
For sure, and especially for a ride that long, I think without having that ability to kind of like vent, and even just saying like out loud, like, I don't know how I'm going to do this tomorrow. Normally you can't even like let that.
You want to share that sort of thought, don't you?
Yeah, exactly.
Something to take a bit of the burden.
It just feels better even just to say it.
Yeah.
And also like she could then sort of put in context what I was doing, and that like in my head I'm like, oh, I'm just being soft, and she's like, you're not being soft. Like these are big days. Like this is a hard thing, and that definitely helped a lot. But it's so. It is very introspective and personal when you're going through those things riding, and I definitely tend to. That's also part of the appeal, is like spending that time with yourself out there on the bike and working through those things on your own terms. I enjoy that,
What about, you talked briefly about getting used to being on a road bike, because most of the season, I guess you're on a gravel bike, really, aren't you?
Yeah.
So, including a lot of your training, and it's not a completely different position, but you're on the tri-bars, aren't you, as well? So it's quite a shift. Did it take you long to adapt to that position? Because obviously you need to be as aero as possible as well. That's why we got one of your POC helmets here.
Yeah.
By the way, if you want to head to the POC helmet stand at 2 p.m, Lachlan's going to be there. Little plug there. This is the one you wore, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can I give it a sniff?
Both of these.
It's actually not too bad. I think it's self-cleansed itself like human hair does. Position was crucial, wasn't it? I mean, it's you wouldn't think so in something like that, but again, even at the lower speeds, you need to be as efficient as possible.
Yeah, it's definitely, that was like one of the big anxieties I had jumping onto a new bike. I'd only ridden it twice before I started, and going straight into riding, 450 Ks on the first day, it can be like a recipe for disaster. So the body definitely took some adapting, and like both of my Achilles swelled up like
Wow.
three times the size in that first week. And I couldn't really walk, and I couldn't work out what it was, but it's just like, the Q factor's slightly narrower.
Right.
On a road bike, right?
So it would actually put them under slight tension, wouldn't it? You'd actually be trying to move subtly, each pedal stroke, move your leg outwards.
Exactly, and then like the aero bars were probably like a centimeter, 2 centimeters too long. So I was sitting on the wrong part of the pads, and then was just wearing through the pads to the metal all the time, and just like little things that, unless you were like 100% like prepared and focused on just riding around Australia, you don't really get the chance to see those things until you get out there. But it's basically like the first half of the ride was very physical in terms of like your body's adapting. There's all this swelling, you kind of feel like hell, and then the body slowly adapts, and then it becomes like, it became for me like very mental the second half. But yeah, a lot of that was down to a new bike.
Was there any point during the ride, and there was clearly some highs and some lows, and it was wonderfully documented, and I'm sure pretty much everybody here has seen some of the video content, and some of the close-up shots. You did quite a bit of talking to camera, and really insightful stuff. Some of it quite strange, and you're clearly in a kind of different place, because you're a pretty chilled out guy anyway. But some of it was like, wow, okay. But when you look back at the ride, was there any point in particular where you actually thought, I really am not going to make this? Was there any points where like this is actually becoming, when you think you can't make it, it hurts, but you push through that, and then there's some points and you physically feel worried about your own kind of mental or physical welfare? So if I go any further, this is going to be reckless?
Yeah.
Is there a point where you were just talking about tipping point?
I definitely, I had two moments, and again, the first one was physical, and it was when we started, basically, we'd been up the East Coast, and then you head inland from Townsville to when you're first in the outback.
Yeah.
And I think it was the second night, and my body was just broken. Like I'd really hurt myself to get through the last few hours to where we were camped, and then that following morning I got up, and it's 6 hours later or something, and I couldn't really walk, and it was hard physically, just like getting dressed and like
right.
putting shoes on and everything else. Just like, this is not good. And so I asked Tom, my mechanic, to put the flat pedals on the bike,
okay.
and like put the seat down a bit, and just like just went out and rode that for the first 200k to kind of let my body settle down.
First 200k.
And then like the body settled down, and that was kind of like tipping point physically. Then everything slowly started to click in.
Right, okay.
But I think the only moment I thought about actually quitting was on the Nullarbor. You do like the long crossing in the bottom of Australia.
Okay.
And
is that after Adelaide or before Adelaide?
It's before Adelaide.
Before Adelaide,
so
right,
yeah,
okay.
connects WA.
Yeah.
And yeah, just had like you cross into South Australia and there's no shoulder on the road anymore, and the trucks that pass that that stretch.
There was a couple of near misses, weren't there? Yeah.
Yeah, and I had one that was like just way too close, and had that feeling of like, is this reckless? Like, what am I trying to achieve here?
Yeah.
What's my acceptable level of risk? And I felt like I was really pushing beyond that. And so that's when we started to change the route up, to get off the highways, and that kind of helped me mentally like accept what I was doing a bit more. But that's not something I would ever do again.
So if you did do it again, would you go the other way around and then do a slightly different route?
Because I think I would just go off-road.
Yeah. Right, mate. Thing is, I can see you doing it, mate. I can see you doing an off-road.
I think I'd prefer it off-road.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, in terms of the record, because you raised a lot of money for a one. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because every big event that you've done, especially the endurance type challenges, you've raised a phenomenal amount of money for very worthy charities. Do you want to briefly talk about the charity that you chose and the reason why you chose that?
Yeah, we were raising money for the Indigenous Literacy Foundation, which is a group that they basically provide books to kids in rural communities, predominantly Indigenous kids, and they also translate a lot of children's books into native languages, which is something that's very much looked over for a lot of the time. So, yeah, providing kids with educational tools on like a very basic level, and yeah, the reason we chose them was wanting to have an impact on, like, kind of directly with communities that we were riding through, and just have some sort of positive impact. So yeah, that's why we chose them. It's
quite, because you're in a position now where kind of the world's your oyster in terms of what you want to actually do, and you've got such a platform. You're so well respected. Everybody loves you, mate. They do, but you clearly, you're an inspirational figure. You're just doing your own thing, and the fact that you've got this platform and you're making some really considered choices who you raise money for is a wonderful thing. So my question to you, in terms of why are you continually challenging yourself? Is it because you can actually raise money for good causes? Is it something that drives you inside? Is it because you just want to break records? What actually drives you, Lachlan? Because where does that come from?
I mean, I don't know what the intrinsic drive is. It's definitely like any big challenge I take on, it's always for a personal reason, a personal motivation, which is pretty important to me, because I think the second I'm doing something because I feel obligated, one, it just becomes a lot harder, but two, just doesn't really interest me. And I'm very aware of like the unique and lucky position I'm in within this sport to go and chase those things, and it kind of, the team allows me to have this imagination and I guess in the end I get that backing to go and chase things. So I think the thing is, it's like I start to think about, like, a ride like Australia, and I can't imagine what it would be like, and then it scares me a little bit, and then I'm like, okay, that's probably something cool to chase.
So the trepidation and the fear is actually something that you want to conquer.
Yeah, because there's something that you're not sure if you can do, and it's going to require something new, and you to pull on different things. So anything I chase, it's always like it's going to require something new of me. Like now I don't feel like I need to go and do another long road ultra, for example, because I've had that experience. So the next thing I do will be different, but I can't sit here and tell you what it is because I haven't thought of it yet.
I mean, we can maybe take some suggestions from have some of that. Yeah. Jot a few notes down. But looking back, so you've done this lap for Australia. You won Unbound earlier in the year as well. It's brilliant, sort of you and Chad Hager going into the final. A completely different physical and mental proposition. Did you surprise yourself in the shape that you were in? And when you look at the quality of the gravel scene in general, it's been ultra professionalized, isn't it? For better or for worse, that's maybe a separate conversation. Yeah. Don't have really time to dig into that now, but did you surprise yourself how well you went? Because That's a different sort of strength. That must remind you that you could still, if you kind of wanted to, just drop back into the World Tour and probably give it a nudge. So you must have been, firstly, really happy with that result, the way you crossed the line, and that was like cathartic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But you were like, yeah, I can still do it at the real top end as well, yeah. Not that
yeah.
was ever in doubt, but.
Yeah, I mean, it's a nice to, I love racing, you know, and as much as I enjoy, you know, the other pursuits I have outside of racing, I think racing gives me something unique, and you're really sucked into something that's so intense for that period of time that I haven't found anywhere else in my life. So I'm always drawn back to racing, and I started as a bike racer, you know, before everything else. And yeah, going to Unbound this year, like, I think it was the day before I finally looked at the start list, and I was like, damn, there's some guys here.
Yeah.
It's going to be a bike race. But it was a feeling of like, it's exciting, you know? And knowing that I had like a fair bit of experience in that course, and I sort of had that confidence of like, I know how this race goes, and I also know how to put together a performance at the end of a tough bike race. And yeah, just kind of went into it pretty open-minded. I knew I was going well, but it was pretty relaxed, and it was like, let's just let the day come. But then after 100 or 160K, I sort of like, I knew I was on a special day, and something flicked in my head. I was like, I want to win this thing, which I hadn't had for a while.
Okay.
You know, where I was like, okay, I wouldn't want to be racing me today. I don't know, I just had that.
Oh, right, I mean that. That's confident. You say back yourself. That's good though, because really, even if you're exceptionally successful, those days don't happen. Those feelings, sometimes it's this craft that gets you the win.
Yeah.
On some occasions you're like, I am actually just on fire.
Yeah, and then you start to look at the race, and you see the people who are in it, and like I've done a lot of different sorts of bike races, but I could pull on all that experience for something like that, you know, and like you could see the way Mahorich was riding on the downhills and stuff, and I was like, well, he's going to flat for sure, which he did. And then, yeah, and I mean, like,
no, well, that's it, you know.
He hadn't ridden that race, you know,
and
I'd made those same mistakes already.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, just seeing the way the tactics went, I was like, if I can get in front of this race, they're not going to be able to chase, you know, and having the legs to do that's another thing. But like, yeah, it was nice to put all that together, you know, on a day and do it, you know, at that race was very special.
And the thing is, a race like that, it's spread over such a long period of time. I just want to drill a little bit into the sentence you said about 3 or 4 minutes ago, which I knew how to put the final of a race together. What do you mean by that? And you also alluded to the fact just going to let the day happen, almost let the road come to you without worrying about just float, and then, because the road can do a lot of damage itself without you doing too much. And a lot of people forget that. They think they have to fight the road, but when a race that long, the road will do a lot of damage just by traveling at that sort of distance, won't it?
Yeah.
It's quite nuanced and subtle, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at that course, like, if you were just to go out and ride it, it's a hard day out.
Yeah.
You know, it's the race, and it's a different race in that it's so chaotic and fast in the beginning. You essentially race it as if it's only 100 miles long, and then a separate race starts again.
Right.
But you have to race that first 100 miles to get into that second selection. So, yeah, it's very unique, and it's a race that I think you have to kind of have experience in to really put it together. And yeah, I was hungry for it that day, you know, which like, I was also like, going back to afterwards, I had that thought of like you said, oh, I still got it, you know, could I be like racing, you know, in the World Tour and that still, but I was like very content with knowing that like, you know, that's the biggest bike race on my calendar that I still do, and I know that's probably the biggest bike race I'll win, you know, like that was it. And having that feeling it made me feel content, because every other big race I've won before that, you know, and a lot of them were early in my career, and you have this, oh, now I can do this, you know, instead of just accepting it for what it was.
Yeah.
And it was nice to get that and have that feeling and kind of put that to bed a bit.
You must be tempted as well if the right course comes along to give the gravel worlds a nudge as well, or is that something? I mean, there's Unbound and there's the Worlds, which this year was just dominated by road pros, wasn't it? And
Yeah.
it was just pure strength, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah.
Less technique, but would you want to give that a nudge if you thought you could have a chance of winning the Rainbow Bands? I'm not sure you just want to ride it, would you?
No, I wouldn't ride it unless I was going to race it.
Yeah.
I know it's in Australia in a couple of years.
Okay.
In Western
You're
Australia.
not designing the course, are you?
No. Wouldn't mind having a little word to someone. But, yeah, I'm definitely tempted to do that in Australia.
Yeah.
I think like it's really exciting what's happening in that gravel space, and there's always debate about what's gravel, the UCI series versus US series, but I think it's all great. It's all more people racing and riding and getting involved in it. So yeah, I'd love to dip my toe and wear the Aussie colours.
So, what intrigues me as well, your lap of Australia, also how the kind of fueling side of things. What are you actually eating? I remember speaking to you a couple of years ago when you did the event in the UK in Enduro. Yeah, you're self-supporting, so you're just eating what you can. It's primarily just beige food from pubs and stuff, and little Tesco Expresses along the way. But it's going to be a little bit different in Unbound, and given the amount of carbs that World Tour pros are getting on board now, you've obviously got to keep across that, because if you're wanting to win something like Unbound, you've got to you can be on great form, but if you don't fuel right, you're not going to be there at the end. So have you found that change, adapting to the way that riders are fueling now, easy to get hold of, or has it taken you a while to attune your body to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm always sort of a bit intuitive with it, and I know it's very like specific now with when it comes to racing, like grams per hour, and but I think in that a lot of people kind of get lost with just listening to the way their own body works. But I mean, in terms of fueling for something like Unbound, I just stick with the things I know, and in a race like that, like drinking a lot of carbohydrate works, for me. So I just kind of stick to that, and then I eat like the payday candy bars, which I don't always eat when I'm training, like, and just kind of stick with something I know. But then something like really long, all of that goes out the window, and it's entirely whatever I'm craving.
Well, that's really important, because for me, when I was racing, you got to get the fuel on board, but then there's something, I actually want to eat something that's going to give me a bit of morale inject. It's like I want to taste something nice to get away from the misery of this bike race and the pain that I'm. So fuel is multifaceted for me. It's like it has to be nice. If there's got to be some value in it, and for my brain as well as like my muscles. Yeah. So, and especially in something as monotonous as like some of your enduro rides you've done, I guess food is important, like something to look forward to drive you on. Yeah,
definitely. I think like I hate it when it's sort of termed as like fuel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's grim, isn't it? That's
super grim. So yeah, with Australia, I was lucky that my wife and Ath, who was there, they would cook something for me, and so I'd have something to look forward to, like at breakfast, like cook some eggs and have some eggs on toast, or like some days I'd just like crave a steak, and then I'd be like, oh, can I get a steak tonight? And then okay, find something and like cook it. But yeah, it's definitely the way I approach it is not, I guess, specifically as an athlete. I'm not trying to hit any, like markers, or I don't really track what I'm having. And it's funny, like some days I would eat a lot, be really, really hungry, and then other days I would eat probably half as much. But you just sort of like deal with what your body's giving you.
Because it can become actually quite unpleasant to fuel. It does become like fueling, like a process. There are points where whatever food you're getting down you have to do it, but it's not actually a pleasant process as well.
Yeah, if you're just trying to, but I'd sort of go about in a way that I was never forcing anything, and I would just allow myself to get hungry and then eat,
Okay.
and then you just find that, you just end up with this wild appetite. You know, like by the time I was halfway around, it's like I could never eat enough. You know, I was just always hungry. So.
Did you actually track your calorie expenditure every day?
No, I didn't have a power meter or a heart rate monitor or anything.
So you didn't ride with a power meter?
No, just go on feel. And yeah, but that would have been huge. There was a few days in there that I was like, I wish I had one on today.
Yeah, I mean,
that was a mega day.
it was an adventure. I mean, just the numbers. I mean, that would have been just another fabulous number to throw in the mix.
Yeah.
But I'm sure somebody could work it out roughly. But just going back to what you're talking about before is, you know, the voyage into the unknown is what kind of sparks your desire to do different things. It's just like really testing yourself. But what would you say, especially on this lap of Australia, that you actually learn about yourself? Was there something like, that's interesting, because each challenge, you're doing it to see how far you can push yourself. So what did you learn about yourself?
I mean, I think the unique thing with this ride was that it was so much more mental, and there was really nothing, you know, if you're riding 500 Ks into a headwind in one direction and you know it's not going to shift, like, it's such a daunting task. And like even now to think about like going and having to do that right now, I'd be like, oh, that's hell, you know? And that doesn't change, but it's just you constantly finding ways to make it fine. And I think the fact that I was able to do that, and there's a few days like in my head that really stick out to where I was like so locked in, and yeah, I didn't think I had that, you know. I've never done anything that's like hard just for hard's sake, and there are a few days in there that were that, you know. Right. It was like, this is just hard. There's no redeeming quality, you know, like, because nothing to look at. There's trucks like flying by me, and
just grim.
Just hard.
Yeah.
Which that's not something I'd experienced before, and being able to deal with that, like, that was like something I hadn't done, you know.
Yeah.
So you find that you like, and I think it's probably true with most people, that if you put yourself in that position and you've left yourself no option but to do it, you'll find a way, you know. And that's like the growth, I guess, that comes out of it.
We were talking just before we came on stage about this particularly long section where you had this headwind for a long period of time, and I remember riding when I was a kid and actually shouting at the wind, actually like yelling because I was so frustrated. I mean, nobody likes riding into a headwind, but you actually did give yourself, you actually shouted at the wind once, didn't you? And said, that's enough. You yelled at the weather.
Yeah, exactly. As if it's like working against you, you know?
It's like, why?
Yeah, like the wind has this plot to make the day hell. Yeah, when I'd been riding into the wind for like 7 days, and it was supposed to switch before the Nullarbor, and the Nullarbor is one place you really don't want a headwind because it's actually dead straight for like 1,200 Ks, and it's like super exposed.
Right.
Yeah, and it's like nightmare fuel. And anyway, it was headwind until halfway along, and it was supposed to switch at 6 p.m. And Graham Sears, who was like my first ever cycling coach, he agreed to come on this ride, and he was like, "Don't worry, mate. Like 6 o'clock, it's going to switch." And
so like, okay, that's
and the problem is you give yourself one of those outs, and then you're like, okay, at 6 p.m. if this wind's still blowing, it's everyone else's fault, you know. Like, and it did. It died right at 6, and I was like, sweet, here it comes, like tailwind, and it switched from like crosshead left, and then it just started blowing like crosshead right, and I was just like, exactly that. Just like the yell, like at the wind. And I was like, I'll give myself one. I was just
one
like,
yell.
Yeah, exactly.
What did you actually say? Was it a rude word?
Yeah. Well,
it was a rude word.
Not
okay, that's right. I mean, fair.
You only get one yell, you got to make it worse.
Yeah, and you don't, definitely.
And then, you just get back to it, you know. Like, but it's funny how you give yourself those outs. Like, the top crossing of Australia, the road is like, someone described it before, they're like, oh, they're Velcro roads up there.
Velcro rides?
Velcro roads.
Oh, Velcro roads, right.
And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, oh, you'll stick to them. And I was like, oh yeah, I'm sure. And got up there and that's exactly what they are. They're just soft, these huge rocks, and it's like, just saps all your speed.
Right.
And so I've been riding along for probably, I guess, 4,000 or 5,000 Ks on these roads. And there was a guy stopped on the side of the road to say good day, and he was like, oh, don't worry, the road gets better in 50K.
And you're like, okay.
And I was like, but he's like, oh yeah, 50K-ish. You know. But in my head, they don't realize that you latch onto that. Like, and then all of a sudden you're like, okay, 50K, like here we come. And then like, it's like 60K and you're like, where is it? Where is it? And then like 100K, you're like that, dude.
I bet you felt like going back and having a word.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. But it's funny because it's like, you'll deal with it for, if you know it's not going to change, you'll deal with it. But the second you give yourself that little out, it's like, yeah, it can break you.
I mean, we've just got a couple of minutes left, Lachlan. I mean, we could talk for ages. He's such an interesting guy. You've got so many stories to tell. But we talked about the grimness of the trip around Australia. But give us the most positive moment of the whole trip. I would imagine just crossing the line at the finish back at home at Port Macquarie was amazing. But there were some real moments where you thought, wow, this is what it's all about. So what was the kind of the biggest highlight that you might actually want to relive potentially?
Yeah, being in the top end of Australia, like completely in the outback, and I was riding a lot. I would start, around midnight, and there's no cars, absolutely no one around, and the stars and like sky out there are just like absolutely insane, And I'd have this whole expanse to myself, for like 5 or 6 hours.
Yeah.
And you'd start to see the sun for like an hour before, and then the sunrises there are just like nothing you'll ever see, and so living those moments, and almost every day there was like one of those moments where you're like, this is what it is, and yeah, I was very conscious of those moments and realizing you're like, as hard as this is, I'm going to be at home in a month, and there'll be part of me wishing I was still doing this.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's those moments you remember, and sometimes you forget how difficult it was. But the thing for me was, it's like I enjoyed the experience so much because it was all of those things, At some moments, it's like I would have rather be anywhere else. At some moments, like I was happy to be there, but I wanted to cry, And some moments, it's like absolute bliss, and that's the appeal. You have all those emotions, in a month-long period.
Got 20 seconds left. I wanted to ask you earlier, but we can run over slightly, but what's the big next project? Have you got something brewing on the back burner? Is there something that you're kind of excited about doing? Can you tell us, give us some clues?
No, I honestly, I'm still waiting for that like motivation to strike. I'm in terms of like next year's season, I'm going to pick some new events, do some things in different countries. I want to take it more out of the US and go a bit more international. But yeah, and beyond that, I don't know.
Well, we want you to come back and tell us about your adventures again, mate. It's always an absolute pleasure. You are a true inspiration. Ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mr. Lachlan Morton.